Namaskar and welcome to World Today. We'll be focusing on the Malabar exercises and Quad. We'll also be looking at outcomes of the G20 on Afghanistan. Let's begin with the headlines. The Malabar exercises reaffirm the spirit of Quad. They strengthen the resolve of India, the US, Australia and Japan to assure an open and rules-based international order, free and peaceful Indo-Pacific. The Democratic-controlled U.S. House of Representatives gives its final approval to legislation temporarily raising the U.S. government's borrowing limit. The deadline for debt default is now pushed till December. The lawmakers have until December 3 to pass legislation to fund the government and prevent a shutdown. The group of 20 countries underlines the need to maintain contact with Afghanistan's Taliban government. They caution that this will not mean any recognition of the Kabul administration. The Italian Prime Minister Draghi says that the virtual meeting was a success despite the absence of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. IMF trims its 2021 global growth forecast to 5.9% from the 6.0% in its World Economic Outlook, and it leaves 2022 global growth forecast unchanged at 4.9%, cuts the growth outlook for the United States and other major industrial powers, and says persistent supply chain disruptions and pricing pressures are constraining the global economy's recovery from COVID-19. The US fights COVID-19 on multiple fronts, even as Boeing and other companies mandate that the US-based employees will now require to show proof of COVID-19 vaccination by December 8 and comply with Joe Biden's orders for federal contractors. White House disapproves Texas Governor Greg Abbott's executive order barring employees and employers, in fact, from imposing the COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Let's begin with the big news. So the Bay of Bengal is witnessing some high-voltage military maneuvers with warships, fighters, aircraft and helicopters of the Quad nations of India, the US, Australia and Japan coming together. This is phase 2 of this top-notch Malabar naval exercises. And this phase from October 12 to 15 will be even bigger than the first one, which was conducted off Guam in Western Pacific at the end of August, with the US also deploying an over 100,000-ton Nimitz-class super aircraft carrier.
Quad has come a long way since it was resurrected in 2017 as a loose coalition comprising the US, Australia, India and Japan. The face-to-face leaders summit in September marked a new high point for the grouping. After the first in-person summit of the Quad leaders took place in the White House on September 24th, the Malabar Phase 2 exercises reaffirmed commitment of the Quad nations to protect rules-based order and free and open Indo-Pacific. India also conducted bilateral naval exercises with both Australia, called Aussie Index, and Japan, called GIMEX, earlier this month to further boost interoperability. The Phase 2 of Malabar will witness a quantum jump in the interoperability operations, including anti-surface, anti-air and anti-submarine drills. U.S. Navy Chief Admiral Michael Gilday on Tuesday held extensive talks with Navy Chief Admiral Karambir Singh with a focus on boosting overall bilateral maritime security cooperation in the backdrop of growing Chinese muscle flexing in key waterways, including in the Indo-Pacific. Bolstering the prosperity and security of the region is what is common to both Gilday's visit as well as the Malabar exercises that began in 1992. India, US, Japan and Australia have expressed their commitment to provide rule-based order rooted in international law. The three-day Malabar exercise seeks to build on the synergy, coordination and interoperability developed during the first phase held in August. The first phase of the exercise was conducted off the Pacific Ocean island of Guam. Indian Navy is taking part in the second phase with INS Ranvijay, INS Satpura, P-81 long-range maritime patrol aircraft, and a submarine. Malabar series of exercises began as an annual bilateral naval exercise between India and the US in 1992. In 2014, the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force became a permanent participant in the drills. Australia joined the drills as a permanent participant last year. It is now one of the cornerstones of military interoperability of the Quad forces. The four countries have advanced their abilities to conduct joint military operations, such as the Malabar naval exercise. They've also strengthened their cooperation in other areas, such as the sharing of military logistics and maritime surveillance and international information, although this is in bilateral and trilateral formats so far. World Today Desk, DD India.
So that brings us to our discussion, and we are discussing this, strengthening the spirit of Quad, and we have with us Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, retired, and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, former senior diplomat. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being with us. Admiral Sinha, let me start with you. So what do we achieve from these exercises? Because after all, Quad is a maritime security provider in a sense. Because the Indo-Pacific, after all, is basically seas. In this context, I mean, is this some sort of a policing activity when we look at it over a period of time?
Well, thank you for getting me on your program. You know, at the moment, we are not linking Malabar exercise to the Quad, because Quad is a process which has begun. And very clearly, everybody has said that it is not a military intention. However, we must understand that the Malabar exercise, the participant navies are same four countries who form the Quad. And therefore, I would believe that if there is a requirement, if there is a time when the enforcement of free and open sea is required, the Malabar countries can plug into the intention, the broader intention of Quad for maritime security, and the expertise and the warships can be used for the purpose for which the Quad has been formed in a larger framework of maritime security. So that broadly is the exercise. The complexity of exercise keeps increasing with every time that they come out. It goes one notch up. And I think this particular exercise, they have come to a very, very high level of interoperability. You see the surface ships, you see PATI aircraft, you will also see MH-60 Romeo anti-submarine warfare helicopters operating out of the US Navy ships. As you would know, that it has been bought by Indian Navy as well, and our pilots and the crew are under training in the US. So we will see the actual operation of this helicopter here.
Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, even though, I mean, the Malabar exercises are not directly being linked to Quad, we can clearly see that the Quad countries are involved. So in what context would you think that, you know, these military exercises would help the diplomatic efforts of Quad?
Well, good evening, Mark. It is indeed a very significant exercise, and as my co-panelist and colleague was mentioning, it is growing in complexity, it's growing in sophistication. What the Quad countries are doing is forming a habit of cooperation, a habit of being able to work together. And we all recall how in 2004, Suamoto, the four Quad countries, then the Quad was not even on the horizon, had acted and coordinated things. Now, why Quad, or why the Malabar exercises and Quad? One thing let us be very clear about is that India is located in a very complicated and sensitive geography. We are historically a seafaring nation. As Prime Minister said, terror came to India through the sea. Colonizers came to India through the sea. 95% of India's trade is through the sea.
Yes.
And, you know, we have a coastline of 7,500 kilometers. So that is the kind of, and then, we all know that we are a peninsula with a number of islands which are quite sensitive. So that is the complexity. And then you have a northern neighbor of ours, China, whose navy is growing at an unprecedented pace. They are wanting to develop a blue water navy, and our previous admiral had said that in 2000 years of world history, no navy has grown that fast. Now, growth is one, but adopting a challenging posture is the other. So these are very broad brush strokes, the kind of complexities that are involved. And it is very important that like-minded countries develop a habit, because it's not just maritime security in the sense that a threat of conflict,
Yes.
but there is terrorism, there is piracy, there is maritime resources, and so on and so forth. So that is the significance, and I think time has even come, I'll go to that extent, to expand Malabar exercises and get some important countries like France in, because that is the need of the hour. Mark.
Indeed. Admiral Sinha, so we can see that, I mean, the Malabar exercises are not new. They've started some time ago, and then after a while, it was first the US and India, and then Japan joined in, and then now we've had Australia, and perhaps, you know, we can add more countries, so it wouldn't be only linked to Quad. But the significance of aircraft carriers and these kind of massive you know, ships that are sailing in these exercises, is that something that, you know, we should be looking at with some significance?
A great significance, Mark, because what you are seeing right now, what you're witnessing, is all three dimensions of the physical warfare, physical contact warfare. One are the surface ships, one are the aircraft, and one is the submarine. And all three of them talking to each other, handling submarine threats, handling ship threats, and handling aircraft threats. So I think that covers all three dimensions which you have available in the environment. And these days, as everybody says, that electronic warfare, the artificial intelligence and cyber, they also form part of these exercises at levels which depends on what equipment is fitted on these four ships. So I think that, you know, as you rightly said, Mark, that we started off with US-India bilateral exercise in 1992, and now we have graduated to a stage where the Australian Navy and the Japanese Navy are also part of this exercise, meaning that all equipment of all these four, the operators, the officers, the men, they are all gelling with each other, they can work with each other, and they are all on the same platform. So it's a big thing, because the ships will be dispersed over, you know, 50, 60, hundreds of miles away. Aircraft will be operating more than 100 miles away. Submarine will be somewhere else. So you can have a multi-dimensional threat in which you exercise and assume a scenario which these four countries' navy can handle together. So I think the complexity, as the ambassador rightly said, it has become more complex, it is more challenging, and you're also trying out new weapon systems, you're trying out new equipment, you know, so that you have gained confidence, so that everybody's on the same footing. Mark.
Indeed. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, the fact is that the countries want to have a rules-based order on the seas, and that's extremely important. But, you know, with the escalation, in a sense, I mean, each of these, when more and more countries join in these kind of exercises, is there a signal being sent out, you know, to the adversary that this is some sort of escalation taking place? Is that something that, you know, needs to be looked at? Because, I mean, to what point can something escalate?
No, Mark, I would not use the term escalation.
Okay.
I think it is the need of the hour. Why? When we say there is the Quad countries or the democratic countries are committed to a rule-based international order, free and open Indo-Pacific, or maritime security, we are talking about it because there is a threat to that. There's a threat to a rule-based international order. There's a threat to a free and open Indo-Pacific region, because a certain country is exercising coercion. We know what happened in South China Sea. So the world cannot allow this to continue to happen. There is bound to be countervailing measures taken to thwart the designs of a country which wants to engage in misadventure. So it is certainly no escalation. The measured steps are being taken because the complexity is such that no single country can on its own operate, howsoever mighty, and there is strength in numbers. So the like-minded countries are coming together, and they understand that the name of the game is coordination, cooperation, and if that message goes across to a certain capital, it is good because nobody wants escalation, as you are saying, but you have to be prepared for the worst to make sure that there is security and peace.
Admiral Sinha, I mean, I use the word escalation perhaps because, you know, there is the significant flashpoint that came in Taiwan, and we can see that, you know, one of the U.S.'s submarines was also damaged. One doesn't know the circumstances that led to that damage. The issue is, I mean, are these sort of responses in a sense, or am I just, you know, judging too much into a minor incident?
No, Mark, you are absolutely right. You aren't sort of making a guess. If any country does not follow the rule of the law and does something which is not as per the UNCLOS, the United Nations Convention for Laws of the Sea, or also the guidelines laid down by IMO, or the guidelines which are accepted norms at sea. If a country does not do that, then we must try and demonstrate that we are here to jointly meet this challenge, and therefore that country in question must be very careful that not to repeat those mistakes the second time. So I think that there is a certain amount of messaging in this as well, as you rightly said, because the point is, you know, you can have power, Mark, but if you don't demonstrate the intention of using it, then that power is not a deterrence at all. Yes. So navies are actually, you know, the force in being, meaning that you have the power and you demonstrate the will to use it when time comes. So these exercises are that display that we have the intention of using this power in all three dimensions of the word, that is in the sky, in underwater, and on the surface. And if you don't follow the rules and regulations, then we can go to the extent, depending upon what kind of offense you do, our response will be absolutely, you know, graduated with respect to the offense that you commit. Right. We are not going, these are democratic countries, we understand the rules. You are the one who does not understand the rule. Look what you have done in South China Sea. Yes. You have just thrown all the rules and regulations out of the window. But if you do that the next time, you better be careful, because we are here, like-minded countries who have convergence of their intentions. That is very important. Right. All these four democratic countries, you know, their intentions are very similar. We want rule-based order, as the ambassador said, and free and open sea for global commons, not only for four of us. It is for the whole world. Right. Because sea is used, the oceans are used for commerce of the entire world. So that is what it means really, Mark. Indeed. Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, I mean, it's global commons as well as global commerce, you know, because at the end of the day, people, the like-minded countries are actually doing business with each other. But, you know, let's say that there is a country that is growing with the economic heft, which is basically expansionist in its agenda, and that is causing, you know, I mean, the economic concerns are also very significant in this region. So this kind of coordination, where, you know, the military aspect is sort of taken care of at the military level between the navies of those countries, and they get along well with each other. But it also has to be backed up by, you know, the development activities that the Quad countries are doing also.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And there is, as you know, and you have alluded to, there is a conscious effort to dilute, at least in the statements that I can see, the security element or the military element of the Quad. But as we were discussing, you know, the Quad countries can operate even outside the Quad framework, because these are partner countries, like-minded countries who are developing a habit of cooperation. So Quad is emerging as a factor of peace, security, taking care of important issues. For example, the vaccine, 1.2 billion doses of vaccine is no small feat, or climate change or democracy. So, but at the same time, in the broadest sense, maritime security is the raison d'etre of the Quad. But Admiral Sinha has mentioned or put his finger on a very, very important point. There are laws, there are rules. They are as good as the implementation. If the international or UNCLOS, for example, does not have so intrinsically the wherewithal to enforce itself, the Committee of Nations has to enforce it.
Right.
Otherwise, you have a situation where the International Court of Arbitration gives an award that China's interpretation of the 9-9 is incorrect, and they merrily violate it. But when India and Bangladesh have a maritime issue, India honors it. So that is the kind of difference. And those countries which are willfully violating the norms, the laws, the covenants, the treaties, have to be taken care of. So that is the whole purpose of this exercise, to make sure that rule of law is observed in letter and spirit. Mark.
Admiral Sinha, the Indian Navy has, been a builder's navy. It's not been a buyer's navy. I mean, we've been building our own infrastructure, and now that, perhaps the requirements are getting more and more, let's say, intense in a sense because of I don't want to use the word escalation, but we have a lot more, interest in the Indo-Pacific, and we have shared interests with other countries. So in that context, do you see, that the Navy will need to increase its arsenal or improve to a large extent, modernize?
Mark, you're right, very much. I mean, the Navy operates at a budget which is sort of less than the other two services, and that is why we have the organization of the Chief of Defence Staff, who's going to do the environment scan, and then the threat perceptions will be decided, and accordingly these services will be allocated with funds to increase their assets and make the assets more effective and more modern. As far as Navy is concerned, Mark, the Navy is a builder's Navy, as you rightly said. And even early 60s, the Navy decided that it will take on the shipbuilding with the help of the public sector shipyards. And we build all our ships. Just about 6-7% of the ships are now not built in India, and that will slowly become zero. Similarly, for submarine, Mark, you see that we have made nuclear submarine. Now we are making the diesel submarines and some more nuclear submarines. So I think that India, it's really Atmanirbhar. Navy is quite Atmanirbhar in its own right. However, I must say that, the ships are right now deployed on a mission-based deployment in 7 very important areas of the Indian Ocean, which is gateway to rest of the Pacific and to the Mediterranean. And what is called the mission-based deployment, ships, aircraft, submarines, they are deployed in a manner that the input of all the ships going in and out of all the what is called the choke points like Malacca Strait, Sunda Strait, Lombok Strait, or the Straits of Hormuz, at all times we know which ship is going where. We have a very robust maritime domain awareness. But mind you, these assets, if they are deployed at sea for longer, they consume more hours and they will fall due for replacement that much quicker.
Yes.
Right now there are some 34 ships in the build which will replace the existing ones when they fall due for their technical life replacement.
Okay.
But it also necessary that while in this meanwhile, more platforms of higher technology are also inducted gradually, so that we are not left behind in the race of this advancing of technology in the world. Mark.
Well, I'd have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Admiral Sinha and Ambassador Vishnu Prakash, for joining us and enlightening us on the importance, the spirit behind these Malabar exercises. Thanks for being with us. Moving on then to our next story. In response to a media query about Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson's comments on the recent visit of Vice President of India to Arunachal Pradesh, the official spokesperson Arindam Bagchi has said. We have noted the comments made today by the Chinese official spokesperson. We reject such comments. Arunachal Pradesh is an integral and inalienable part of India. Indian leaders routinely travel to the state of Arunachal Pradesh as they do to any other state of India. Objecting to the visit of Indian leaders to a state of India does not stand to reason and understanding of Indian people. Further, as we have mentioned earlier, the current situation along the LAC in the western sector of the India-China border areas has been caused by unilateral attempts of the Chinese side to alter the status quo in violation of bilateral agreements. Therefore, we expect the Chinese side to work towards early resolution of the remaining issues along the LAC in eastern Ladakh while fully abiding by bilateral agreements and protocols rather than trying to link unrelated issues. And moving on then to our next story, which is about the United States. Now, the U.S. House of Representatives has passed a bill. They did so on Tuesday, and this temporarily raises the country's borrowing ceiling with a $480 billion debt limit increase. And this was done by a vote of 219 to 206, and it has averted the country's first debt default in history. The Treasury Department said that the move will ensure the federal government can continue till December 3. Now, last week, the U.S. Senate had agreed to this emergency debt ceiling extension. The Democratic-controlled U.S. House of Representatives gave its final approval on Tuesday, October 12, to legislation temporarily raising the government's borrowing limit to $28.9 trillion, pushing off the deadline for debt default only until December. Democrats, who narrowly control the House, maintained party discipline to pass the hard-fought $480 billion debt limit increase by 219 to 206. The vote was along party lines, with every yes from Democrats and every no from Republicans. President Joe Biden is expected to sign the measure into law before October 18, when the Treasury Department has estimated it would no longer be able to pay the nation's debts without congressional action. House passage warded off concerns that the United States, the world's largest economy, would go into default for the first time, but the temporary extension set the stage for continuing fighting between the parties.
The failure to lift the debt limit could result in the loss of up to 6 million jobs, the elimination of $15 trillion in household wealth, and drastic increase in the cost of loans, car loans, mortgages, student loans, credit card bills, and other borrowing.
Republicans insist Democrats should take sole responsibility for raising the debt limit because their party wants to spend trillions of dollars to expand social programs and tackle climate change.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the lady from Minnesota for yielding and for pointing out the truth. You know, I am glad that I decided to wear my boots today because it's getting deep in the swamp up here today, listening to the garbage on the other side of the aisle. Let's put it this way. The Democrats have already pushed through $2 trillion of reckless, wasteful spending at the expense of working-class Americans. And now they're wanting to push through another $4.3 trillion reckless spending bill that will reward their political friends, their wealthy donors, and their allies at the expense of working-class Americans.
Democrats say the increased borrowing authority is needed largely to cover the cost of tax cuts and spending programs during former Republican President Donald Trump's administration, which congressional Republicans supported.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And you wonder why people hate Congress. I mean, we have somebody on the Budget Committee who's trying to make us believe that, in fact, that raising the debt limit somehow controls spending. The bottom line is the debt limit is about paying the bills that have already been accumulated, including many of the bills that my friend who just spoke voted to accumulate, including a tax cut bill that benefited the well-off and the well-connected.
Lawmakers also have only until December 3 to pass legislation to fund the government and prevent a shutdown. Pelosi also repeated the Democrats do not want to use a procedural maneuver called reconciliation to raise the ceiling. Reconciliation would let Democrats raise the ceiling with 51 votes rather than 60 required under the Senate's filibuster rule if Republicans will not cooperate. The Senate's vote last week to raise the limit, which had been more routine before the current era of fierce partisanship, turned into a brawl Republicans tried to link the measure to Biden's goal of passing multi-trillion-dollar legislation to bolster infrastructure and social services while fighting climate change. The months-long fight over the debt limit is closely tied to the November 2022 congressional elections, when Republicans are trying to gain majorities in both the House and the Senate. Democratic lawmakers fear that a Republican boycott of future efforts to raise the debt ceiling will leave them exposed to political attack ads over the next year that accuse Democrats of fiscal malfeasance and disregard for the ballooning debt. But Democrats in turn accuse Republicans of being willing to let the country default on its debts to score political points. During the Trump administration, the debt limit was raised 3 times with the support of Democrats, despite their opposition to Republican initiatives that added to government debt, like 2017 tax cut legislation and Trump priorities like construction of a southwest border wall to keep immigrants out. World Today Desk, DD India. Well, the group of 20 major economies, they are determined to tackle the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, even if it means having to coordinate efforts with the Taliban. The Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi has said that, he said this in fact after hosting that emergency summit on Tuesday.
The group of 20 major economies is determined to tackle the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, even if it means having to coordinate efforts with the Taliban, Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi said on Tuesday after hosting an emergency summit. Since the Taliban took over Afghanistan on 15th of August, the country, already struggling with drought and severe poverty following decades of war, has seen its economy all but collapse, raising the spectre of an exodus of refugees. Draghi said at the end of a video conference that there has been basically a convergence of views on the need to address the humanitarian emergency.
We have to answer the humanitarian crisis. That's the very first thing. If that requires, and it will require contacts with the Taliban. There's no alternative to having contacts with them. They are essential for this answer, for this response to be effective. That doesn't imply a recognition. A recognition will have to acknowledge that the Taliban will be judged for what their deeds are, not their words. Recognition means, at least by most of the G20 countries, means that progress has been made exactly along the words and the commitments the Taliban government took a few days ago.
US President Joe Biden, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and many European leaders took part, but Chinese President Xi Jinping and Russian President Vladimir Putin did not dial in, suggesting differing international positions on the emergency. Draghi said the absence of the latter two leaders did not undercut the importance of the meeting organized by Italy, the current G20 chair. Addressing the summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed upon preventing the Afghan territory from becoming a source of radicalization and terrorism. The Prime Minister called for a unified international response based on UNSC Resolution 2593 to improve the situation in Afghanistan. The UN Security Council Resolution 2593, issued on 30th of August under India's month-long presidency, emphasizes that Afghanistan must not allow its soil to be used for terrorism-linked activities. Prime Minister Narendra Modi also called for urgent and unhindered humanitarian assistance to Afghan citizens. There was unanimous agreement among the participants about the need to elevate the crisis in Afghanistan, where banks are running out of money, civil servants have not been paid, and food prices have soared, leaving millions at risk of severe hunger. Much of the aid effort will be channeled through the United Nations, but there will also be direct country-to-country assistance, despite a refusal by most states to officially recognize the hardline Taliban government. Italy said it is indeed very hard to see how nations can help people in Afghanistan without involving the Taliban, but that would not mean recognizing them. He said the Taliban would be judged by their deeds, not their words, and the world was especially concerned about the plight of women in the impoverished nation. The White House said leaders had discussed the critical need to maintain a laser focus on enduring counter-terrorism efforts, including against threats from ISIS-K. In a joint statement after the meeting, the G20 leaders called on the Taliban to tackle militant groups operating out of the country. They said future humanitarian programs should focus on women and girls, and that safe passage should be given to those Afghans who wish to leave the country. Tuesday's meeting comes less than 3 weeks before the formal G20 Leaders Summit in Rome on 30th and 31st of October, which is due to focus on climate change, global economic recovery, tackling malnutrition and COVID-19 pandemic. World Today Desk, TD India.
The US Vice President Kamala Harris said on Tuesday that European explorers who first landed on the US shores, they had ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetrating violence, stealing land, and spreading disease. She told the National Congress of American Indians, the largest U.S. organization of Native people. And she spoke the day after Columbus Day, and that day marks the landing of the explorer Christopher Columbus and the newly recognized Indigenous Peoples Day as well.
Since 1934, every October, the United States has recognized the voyage of the European explorers who first landed on the shores of the Americas. But that is not the whole story. That has never been the whole story. Those explorers ushered in a wave of devastation for tribal nations, perpetrating violence, stealing land, and spreading disease. We must not shy away from this shameful past, and we must shed light on it and do everything we can to address the impact of the past on Native communities today.
Navy nuclear engineer and his wife faced their first court hearing on charges that they attempted to sell secrets about nuclear submarines to a foreign power in exchange for cryptocurrency. They appeared before the court for a formal reading of the criminal charges against them, and they have not yet been asked to enter a plea to these charges. Jonathan Toby and his wife Diana, they were arrested on Saturday in Jefferson County, West Virginia, following a year-long sting operation by the undercover FBI agents. Toby, who's a nuclear engineer with top-secret security clearance, is accused of sending naval documents to an unnamed foreign entity in 2020, along with instructions for how to obtain additional information. Gabby Petito, the young woman who vanished on a road trip with her boyfriend and later turned up dead in Wyoming, was killed by strangulation, a local coroner has said on Tuesday. Her boyfriend, Brian Laundrie, 23, has been missing for nearly a month. Her body was discovered on September 19 near the remote Spread Creek Dispersed Campground in Bridger, Telton. This is the National Forest in western Wyoming. The disappearance last month of the young woman during a cross-country road trip with her boyfriend captivated the U.S. first as an internet sensation and then as a tabloid mystery that grew more enigmatic by the day. Petito and Laundrie, who lived with Laundrie's parents in Northport on Florida's west coast, embarked on this trip in early July from New York's Long Island, where her parents live, and Laundrie returned without her on September 1 to his family's Northport home, driving Petito's white van. 10 days later, Petito's mother, Nicole Schmidt, reported her missing to police in New York, with the search becoming more public after Florida police named Laundrie the person of interest in this case. The police in Moab in Utah, they released body cam footage on September 15 that suggested a darker side to the couple's sunny social media veneer. Well, Laundrie, who had refused to talk to Northport police on the advice of his lawyer, has not been seen since September 14, when his parents later said that he told them that he was going for a hike in the nearby Carlton Reserve Wilderness area. Laundrie has not been charged with her death. Boeing Company's US-based employees, they will now be required to show proof of a COVID-19 vaccination, or they will have to get an approved medical or a religious exemption, and they have to do so by the 8th of December. This is to comply with the US President Joe Biden's order for federal contractors. The US plane maker has now followed the American Airlines as well as the aircraft's manufacturer Spirit AeroSystems in announcing that they will be complying with this executive order. Last week, President Biden said that more US businesses should obligate that their workers receive COVID-19 vaccinations, calling the move vital to end the pandemic and also to sustain the economy. Well, the White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki has said that the Texas Governor Greg Abbott's executive order, which bars employers and others from imposing a COVID-19 vaccine mandate, is out of step with businesses in the state. Abbott was responding to what he called bullying by the U.S. President Joe Biden's administration on the prohibiting all COVID-19 vaccine mandates. This is what he said. All these vaccines mandates should be out, including private employers. Psaki said Abbott's decision was motivated by politics, not science.
Clear when you make a choice that's against all public health information and data out there, it's not based on what is in the interest of the people you are governing. It's perhaps in the interest of your own politics.
In China, Shaanxi province, several people have died during incessant rainfall and flooding. The normal dry regions of this county, they have received 3 months of rainfall in 1 week, in just 1 week. So the lives of over 1.75 million residents from 76 counties and districts have been disrupted by the natural calamity. According to the Provincial Emergency Management Department, as many as 1,200,000 people have been temporarily evacuated. Around 1,900,000 acres of crops have been damaged and more than 17,000 houses have collapsed because of the heavy rains. A level 4 emergency flood response was activated in Shaanxi, so this province also issued a level 3 emergency response for natural disasters. The prices of coal, which are used in China's power plants, has surged to a new record high because of the flooding in Shaanxi. Because Shaanxi province has at least 60 coal mines which have been suspended because of the floods. On Tuesday, thermal coal on the Jiangsu commodity exchange had risen by over 10%. On the Spanish island of La Palma, over 700 residents were ordered to abandon their homes as red-hot lava advanced towards their neighborhood. The river of molten magma descended from the Cumbre Vieja volcano in the northeast of the Canary Island, following which residents were asked to vacate their residence with their belongings and pets. About 6,700 people have been evacuated from their homes on La Palma, which has about 83,000 residents or inhabitants. And there were 64 seismic movements on Tuesday. The strongest one had measured 4.1 on the Richter scale. So this is what the Spanish National Geological Institute had reported. Meanwhile, Spain's military emergency unit, their forces had been clearing the ash from the roofs of these buildings which have been affected by the volcanic eruption in the island of La Palma. Indigenous people in Argentina and Venezuela, they marched to mark the day of race for Columbus Day. In Buenos Aires, indigenous people from Chile and Bolivia played music and they performed traditional dances in front of the Argentine Congress. The streets of Caracas were also filled with hundreds of demonstrators from indigenous groups from all over the country, with people holding signs that identified their different communities. October 12 marks the anniversary of the arrival of Christopher Columbus in the Americas in 1492. Some economics-related news. The World Economic Outlook of the IMF has trimmed its 2021 global growth forecast to 5.9%. It was just slightly higher. It was in fact 6.0%. That was the forecast they gave in July. And it left the 2022 global growth forecast unchanged at 4.9%. Global manufacturing activity has been slammed by the shortages of the key components in the global supply chain because they are struggling to get back to normal after the pandemic-induced shutdowns last year.
Persistent supply chain disruptions and pricing pressures are constraining the global economy's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The International Monetary Fund has said as it cut growth outlooks for the United States and other major industrial powers. In its World Economic Outlook, the IMF trimmed its 2021 global growth rate forecast to 5.9% from the 6.0% forecast it made in July. It left a 2022 global growth forecast unchanged at 4.9%. Global manufacturing activity has been slammed by shortages of key components such as semiconductors, clock ports, and a lack of cargo containers and a labor crunch as global supply chains optimized for efficiency have struggled to return to normal after pandemic-induced shutdowns last year. Demand-supply mismatches fueled in part by excess savings built up in wealthy countries have driven up prices, causing spikes in inflation. The IMF said it expects inflation to return to pre-pandemic levels next year, but warned that persistent supply disruptions risk unanchoring inflation expectations. The United States is taking the brunt of these effects, and the IMF slashed its 2021 US growth forecast by a full percentage point to 6.0% from 7.0% in July, a level that was seen as the strongest pace since 1984.
So while we've seen a rebound in demand, supply hasn't been able to rebound as fast, and that combination has led to high levels of inflation. We've seen that in commodity prices. We're also seeing that in supply chain breakdowns. So again, the expectation is that some of this will persist into next year, but then over time we expect that these will iron out, and we should expect to see inflation coming back to much more normal ranges. But again, I'm just going to emphasize that there is tremendous uncertainty. We have never seen a recovery of this kind, where you have shortages in the labor market at the same time that you have high levels of unemployment, the fact that you have ports that aren't able to offload container ships. So this is very unique, and we have to be particularly vigilant.
Gopinath also said that the IMF takes data integrity incredibly seriously and has a robust system in place to ensure the credibility of its data and forecasts, but is always looking for ways to improve. She noted that the IMF board on Monday expressed full confidence in IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva and the IMF's analytical work following its review of claims that Georgieva pressured World Bank staff to change data to benefit China. The US Treasury called for proactive steps from the IMF to reinforce data integrity and credibility.
Just to be clear, we have a very robust system already at the IMF in terms of making sure the credibility, the integrity of our data and forecasts. We also have the Independent Evaluation Office that reviews these reports that we put out on a regular basis. And again, we're always looking for ways to improve. So, I look forward to seeing what additional steps are mentioned.
Georgieva, a Bulgarian economist and the first person from a developing country to head the fund, had vehemently denied the claims. She welcomed the board's endorsement in a separate statement of her own, and she said was pleased its members had agreed the allegations against her were unfounded. World Today Desk, DD India.
The British writer J.K. Rowling has released a new children's book on Tuesday about a little boy and his big toy. The Harry Potter and the Harry Potter author's new story is called The Christmas Pig, and it follows Jack, who loves his childhood toy, Dulpig, or DP for short, However, one Christmas Eve, he loses DP with the help of Jack's newest toy called the Christmas Pig. The magic begins as the pair embarks on an adventure and helps save a best friend that Jack has never known. In 2020, Rowling first published the fairy tale, the Ichabog, online during the lockdown for free, later donating royalties of the book to a trust, and it helps vulnerable groups affected by COVID-19. She also writes under a pseudonym, Robert Galbraith, releasing crime novels like Troubled Blood last year. The Christmas Pig is illustrated by Jim Field, who is an award-winning illustrator, character designer, as well as animation director, who has illustrated children's books including Oi Frog, The Lion Inside, and the Rabbit and Bear series. Durga Puja celebrations, they are going on with great fervor and religious enthusiasm in more than 32,000 mandaps across Bangladesh. The Saptami Puja was observed on Tuesday in Dhaka and other towns, and these are visuals of the Saptami Puja from Bangladesh. The festival of Dasara, celebrating the victory of good over evil. It has been being celebrated in the Indian Embassy in Peking and being done so with great enthusiasm. Around 2,000 people, including a large number of Peking-based diplomats, Chinese people and members of the Indian diaspora participated in the Dasara Mela, which was organized at the India House. This happened on Sunday, and it was the crowning glory of the Amrit Mahotsav celebrations in Peking. The highlight of the cultural program was a stage performance, the Ram Leela, by the Indian community members there. It also had fireworks display and the burning of the effigy of Ravan, which received thunderous applause from the Peking-based diplomatic corps, also officials of the Chinese think tanks and members of the Indian diaspora who immersed themselves in Indian culture. Time now to go beyond the headlines. These are stories that are unique and different.
As Day of the Dead approaches, Mexico, streets, homes and altars start to get covered in bright orange flowers of the Mexican marigolds, also known as the flower of the dead. Their scent is believed to attract the souls and draw them back. Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, is a celebration of life and death. Mexicans will celebrate the Day of the Dead on 2nd November this year. On this day, Mexicans remember and honor their deceased loved ones. They visit cemeteries, decorate the graves and spend time there in the presence of their deceased friends and family members. They also make elaborately decorated altars in their homes to welcome the spirits. Last year, marigold producers in Mexico City were not able to sell their flowers because of the restrictions imposed to halt the spread of the coronavirus. But this year, producers are hoping their sales will see a big increase. The parents of Amy Winehouse are releasing nearly 800 personal and professional items belonging to their late daughter for auction. Winehouse released 2 albums before her untimely death at her Camden Town house in July 2011 at the age of 27. According to the Julian's auction, one of the top lots is considered to be the dress she wore during her last public performance in 2011 and is estimated between $15,000 to $20,000. Most of the other dresses are conservatively priced between $2,000 to $4,000. Thousands of Brazilian devotees gathered at the National Sanctuary of Our Lady of Aparecida in Sao Paulo City as the Basilica reopens for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. With 6 masses at the main building and 7 at an event center, parishioners were thankful for the opportunity to reunite with Brazil's most important and popular saint. Vivid green strands of light danced across the night sky over the Canadian province of Alberta. The Aurora Borealis, also known as the Northern Lights, were visible due to the impact of a coronal mass ejection. According to NASA, CMEs are performed from clouds of solar plasma combined with embedded magnetic fields which are released into space following a solar eruption. The Aurora Borealis also lit up the night skies of the United States with a vivid green hue. Video shared on social media showed the shimmering lights over Grand Forks in North Dakota. Wildlife officials in the US state of Colorado have freed an elk of a tire which had been around its neck for at least 2 years. Officials from Colorado Parks and Wildlife intervened after a local resident alerted them of bull sighting. The animal was then located wandering amid a herd of 40 other elks. The team then tranquilized the elk and cut off its antlers before removing the tire. Peruvian police used a drone to rescue a pigeon trapped in a high-tension electric wire in Lima. Video footage showed officers equipped a drone with a knife to cut the string that trapped the bird to the high-voltage cable. Residents said that the animal was struck on the electric wire for more than 12 hours. After falling down on a resident's roof, police and locals cut the string that was tied around the pigeon's legs. Neighbors brought the rescued animal to a local shelter for abandoned animals. A statue of Christopher Columbus in central London has been doused with red paint. The bronze statue of the 15th century Italian explorer sits on the edge of Belgrave Square, close to the Buckingham Palace. It was seen covered in red paint with a red cross marked over the inscription commemorating the life of the Italian explorer between 1446 and 1506. British writer J.K. Rowling has released a new children's book about a little boy and his pig toy. The Harry Potter author's new story called The Christmas Pig follows Jack, who loves his childhood toy Door Pig, or DP for short. However, one Christmas Eve he loses DP. With the help of Jack's newest toy called the Christmas Pig, the magic begins as the pair embarks on an adventure and helps save a best friend that Jack has never known. World Today Desk, DD India.
And that's the world today. Thank you very much for watching. Namaskar.